everybody. If you are on the East Coast, West Coast, or around the world, this is Football Talk. We are Blue Friday this morning. We got the Seahawks coming up this weekend, and of course, this is Hawk Talk. Got a lot of good questions from you this week, but let's first go through a little bit of this Washington game. And the Washington game was one that I felt like they really needed to come in and dominate this game. For it to be a true get-right kind of game, they needed to not kind of squeak out a win against this Washington team. Not to take anything away from Washington. They're actually playing very well. Despite that, I mean, Sam Howell put up a ton of yards. So, I mean, they're doing things effectively. But this is one where the Seahawks are just the better team, and they should have been able to dominate this game a little bit. And you wanted to see a better showing, especially after the absolute beatdown they took against the Ravens. That being said, watching the Ravens and how they've beat people, that just really it told me more about the Ravens than it did about the Seahawks. I think they've been able to come in and beat up on really good teams. And so for, the Lions to bounce back, and then of course now the Seahawks bounce back. And so, I mean, that Ravens team is incredibly good. Hey, good morning. It's an incredibly good showing for Washington. There was a lot of things that need to get cleaned up on the Seattle side, though. If you were watching the game, there were quite a few times where we had guys out of position. Communication just wasn't very good on the defensive side of the ball. And, as you start to look ahead, right, you're not looking past the Rams by any means, but as you start looking ahead towards the end of the season, some of these mistakes you can't make, especially against these top flight teams they're going to come up against. And certainly if they get into the playoffs, every team that you're going to encounter from there, you really have to have good communication. You got to be in position. I mean, I get the eagerness to get in on a tackle, but sometimes your job really is just the outside contain to make sure that the play doesn't bounce out and get around you, which they had a couple of those. One of them led to a touchdown. The other one, is roughly about a 45-yard gain. A very similar play where they broke on the ball, being a little too aggressive, and then it ended up opening something up. Those are some elements that they're going to have to clean up. One thing that was really encouraging, though, is Myers was incredibly good yet again. Goes 5 for 5. Definitely just a clutch element of this Seahawks team, because he single-handedly has kept this team in some games. He puts up 17 of our points this last weekend. So there's a lot to be said about having a good kicker in the room. And he has definitely been really consistent for this team, which is, it's nice, especially for a team that's had a real, had a real tough time getting in the end zone. They've been able to drive the field a bit, but they really just can't seem to close drives off and score. And that's where Myers has come in huge, being able to, struggling. All right. That's where he's come in really, really clutch for the Seahawks to be able to at least cap off these drives with points when they're not punching it in the end zone. Sorry, my screen just blacked out. All right. So this was a game that was good for Geno. Geno had a pretty efficient day. He goes 31 for 47 for 369 and 2 touchdowns. And it's funny because there's elements of this fan base that are still mad at him because a lot of those were yards after catch. But then they were in the preseason, they were talking about how good Justin Fields was with his 3 passes and 2 touchdowns for, it was like 169 yards or whatever. And, just glossing over the fact that he had -1 air yards. So, I mean, if you're going to complain about it, keep the same energy. right? I mean, at that point, you're just exposing the fact that you just don't like Geno for whatever reason. And by no means am I a huge Geno fan or Geno apologist or anything like that, but just accept the fact that he had a good game, right? I get that you want to move on. There's a bunch of people crying for Drew Lock to get a start. I mean, you've seen Drew Lock start. He did it in Denver. Wasn't that great. He did look better in the preseason, but the thing is it's preseason. You're playing against a bunch of guys that aren't in the league anymore. So just be happy with the fact that you got a quarterback that's being efficient and you have a team that has a winning record. So, I mean, all of this Geno hate is really kind of funny. Most of it is, like some of it is founded, right? He needs to not turn the ball over, something he was able to, get out of this last game here. But I mean, some of it is just irrational hate for the guy, which is kind of funny to read. But, at the end of the day, just benching him when he is leading this team, it doesn't make any sense. Doesn't make any sense, especially for a guy that isn't necessarily, it's not like he's going to be Josh Allen or Joe Burrow or Mahomes or something. I mean, you're by your logic, you are trading out a career backup, as a lot of these guys like to call him, for another backup. So, I mean, what exactly are you trying to accomplish here? You might as well go with the guy that is winning you games. Now you have Walker had a good day, 19 carries, 63 yards. And of course, Metcalf, he had a real nice day too, 7 receptions for 98 yards. So there's a lot of things to like in this game. I think the biggest problem was they still aren't able to punch it in, and they're still having a real hard time converting on third down. So that's probably the biggest thing that they really need to get figured out is third downs really on both sides of the ball. They haven't been able to convert third downs very well, and they haven't been able to get off the field on third down. So those are two elements that really need to change. But at the end of the day, it goes in the win column. You got another game that was a last-second field goal. There was 6 of them this weekend. So that was pretty crazy. Shows there's a lot of parity or just a lot of bad football. Depends on how it is you're looking at it. But, it's definitely – man. Apparently I needed to drink more coffee this morning already. But – so let's get into some of these questions. So we got quite a few today, and one of them is, why is there so much Geno hate? So that one was asked. It's funny because there's kind of both ends of this question. The other one that was coming through a bunch is, can we get rid of Geno? And the hate for Geno is funny because most of it isn't, most of it's unfounded. The last few weeks, did he turn the ball over? Sure. Did he make some bad decisions? Sure. But you also got to keep in mind that he hasn't had an offensive line. So his offensive line right now has nobody on it. Basically, their offensive line is very similar to where the Rams and the Cardinals were last year. Is they just had a rotating cast. They never had the same guys. And that's exactly where this Seahawks offensive line is. And if you remember the last year, it didn't work out particularly great for the Rams or the Cardinals. So the fact that they have a winning record with this rotating cast up front is actually pretty impressive when you think about it, because they have tight ends making blocks. They have running backs coming in to create pass protection. So, I mean, not to say that doesn't happen anyway, but when they are more of a focal point of that offensive line because there's so many injuries, then, you got to look at what it is and understand that Geno is pressured, just under 50% of his throws. That it's hard to be efficient that way. Now he didn't have that same kind of pass rush going against him this last weekend, but over the last, I think it was 3 or 4 games, he was close to 50% pressure rate, which is insane. So is he going to make mistakes? Sure. I think anybody would. So that the hate, I guess, basically just comes from people just didn't want him. They have this, preconception that he's a backup. He's always going to be a backup. Nothing you can do about it. And they're just ignoring the stats that he's putting up, which, I mean, if you believe whatever you believe, I guess, great. But most of it is unfounded hate for the guy. He's been efficient. He's been able to score. One of the things that is kind of funny, they talk about his lack of touchdowns. Now, some of it is they haven't been able to finish drives, so that part of it's fair. But we're also a heavy running team, so his touchdown passing totals is going to be less anyway, because a lot of those go to running backs on this team. So some of those numbers where people are like, oh, he's only thrown for, I think it's like 11 touchdowns or something like that. Yeah, but a lot of the touchdowns that they do get aren't on passing plays. So he's not going to get those stats. So I don't know. Most of it doesn't make sense for the guy. All right. Where do I like to write for the show? Everywhere. So it really depends on the day. So sometimes it's like early in the morning, I'll have a cup of coffee and I'll come down and write. And then, but if it's during the day and I'm trying to get something done, sometimes it's nice to just be out of the office. And so I will go and, hit up a coffee shop or sit in a courtyard. I mean, not now because it's cold and raining mostly, but although it's not raining today, but mostly it's cold. So I'll do less of that. But I'll sit in kind of common areas, and that way I can talk with, sports fans that are, coming through or whatever. And sometimes that helps my writing because it gets gets the brain running. And then sometimes they'll bring up something that I didn't think about that I want to put a spin on. So that's kind of where I write, is everywhere. But early in the morning, because I wake up so early and you don't really want to make noise, that's generally what I'll end up doing a lot of my writing. All right. Should they fire Shane Waldron? So, I mean, no, if you think about it, they are, I want to say they're 15th in scoring, and they're doing this again without an offensive line. So you got to give Waldron quite a bit of credit for being creative in using all the players to be able to even create anything. When you figure their main guy in Lucas on, their main tackle, he's out. He's been out, basically the whole season after the first half of the first game, right? He's been gone. Alex Cross is, he's back in, but he's still not quite right. And then they have kind of a moving group of guys. So I don't think he deserves to get fired. I mean, at the end of the day, he's like flex sealing this thing together, duct tape, Band-Aids, like, just trying to get an offensive line together. So I don't really know what you were expecting from a team that is so beat up front. Especially when you figure Gino's getting a lot of pass rush. I don't know. It doesn't seem like a good way to fire the guy when there's so many injuries. That almost feels like it would be just a scapegoat kind of move, and that's not. It's not something that the Seahawks typically do, and it's not necessary. I mean, the team's winning, so it's tough to want to fire a guy if it's working. All right. What did I think of the DK clip? So this about blocking. So this is funny because this really stems from the fact that he came out and had that sound bite where I'm not going to change how I play because he was getting all these 15-yarders. And I talked about it a bunch of times on this show. And so if you haven't seen it, it is on my YouTube, you can find it on, I would imagine, the Seahawks Twitter and stuff as well. But basically, the refs are coming up and, telling him they're going to be watching. And he's like, hey, I'm going to block. And he's like, but as soon as the whistle blows, I'm just doing this. And so it was hilarious. He understands that, after saying that, people are going to be watching him a little bit closer. So at least he understands the assignment there. And it's a really funny clip, so definitely check it out. Again, it is here on YouTube. It'll also be on the Seahawks Twitter, Facebook. It'll be on all the socials because it was a hilarious soundbite. But I loved it. It means that he's self-aware of some of the problems he was creating. So hopefully that is something that is going to continue to be a positive thing moving forward. Obviously, it's been a couple of games since he's had one of those now, which is encouraging because he was kind of on pace to have a lot of penalties this year. So I do like the fact that DK kind of gets what's happening and trying not to get those anymore. All right. What tweaks does the defense need to make for the rest of the schedule? The biggest thing is you need to tackle. It's something that it's weird to see a Seahawk team that can't tackle, but for some reason, they're really struggling, especially as of late, to get good tackles. They'll throw a shoulder, a guy will bounce off, but they don't wrap up, and they end up stretching it for more yards. So if there was any one item, that's probably it, is they need to wrap up. There's a lot of these third downs that get converted because they didn't wrap up. These guys are all big. So throwing a shoulder isn't generally going to work. So that and, probably communication would be the other thing on the defensive side. Kind of like I said in the opening, is you end up with guys that are out of position, and it's tough to win games if you're giving up some easy plays, especially big easy plays. One of them, against Washington, it was around to the outside, and the safety and the corner came up. Guy leaks behind him, off to the races, and he scores. And then you basically saw that exact same play again, reacted to almost exactly the same, and it went for, again, I think it was like 45 yards, something like that. He did get forced out of bounds finally, but it's those kinds of things that the defense kind of has to understand what their role is. And, it's tough to not want to try and come up on a play. Like if you think you see something, especially in the safety position, sometimes you're back and your job is to stay back. But if you see something that looks like the play is, coming together in front of you, you want to break up on it, but it's kind of not your assignment there. You're still trying to be that containment over the top. And, sometimes just mental errors will get you to suck inside. And then if a guy leaks out, now you're out of position. Now you're just hoping you can get an angle to force him out before he scores. So those are probably the two main elements that I want to see this defense change, because they have pieces. I mean, the guys are there. The secondary is great. The front seven is really coming along. They still struggle against in breaking routes and along the seams to, slot receivers and tight ends. But, some of that is also because they're having a harder time tackling for some reason. And it allows those plays to be bigger than they should be. It's bad enough if they're already catching it, but if you're going to give up, 5-6 yards after contact, like it's not a great scenario. So those are really my biggest concerns on the Seahawks defense as it sits. But we'll see against the Rams this week and see what they can kind of tighten up. All right. How would I approach the remaining schedule? I guess as far as offense would be my guess what you're asking there. So my approach there, because of the weird protection issues that Seattle has given Geno, they really need to do a lot more play action than they are. He has a really good success rate off of play action. And when he's straight dropping back, that's where he's getting his most amount of pressures. So they really need to sell that play action. I actually wouldn't mind seeing a little bit of, those Hasselbeck days where you have both running backs in the backfield. If you ran, like an offset eye or something, that could be a really nice package for Geno, because play action obviously works there. You potentially have one of your running backs as a lead blocker, but then you also end up with, if they aren't if they aren't doing a running play, they are doing the play action off it. Now you have those guys inside to help block. They're eligible receivers, so if they do shove off a block, leak out 5 yards, that's a guy that's probably going to be open. So it's some of those older play designs that I think would actually help this team, especially because, again, the offensive line is just banged up, and I don't know that they're going to get all their guys back throughout the season anyway. So if they did some of those, split backs or offset backs, those could be really nice plays against, especially a real aggressive defense. So when they go up against the Niners, when they're going against the Cowboys, when they're going against the Eagles, those are guys that, those are high motor type defenses. And if you can get them to be real aggressive and you're playing some of those kind of offensive schemes, you end up creating these little pockets in behind the defense that you can throw this ball to. So I think it would work schematically against them. But it's not really an offense that they run anymore. So they have ran quite a few of the, two tight end, single back type things. But they don't run a lot of the dual backs. But I think it could be a very beneficial thing for for them moving forward. All right, do they draft Penix? I wouldn't hate that draft. That would be a pretty good pick. The thing is I don't think Penix will still be on the board by the time Seattle gets their pick. They're going to be a wild card team, which that means they're going to be one of the last 10 to pick. So will Penix still be on the board? I doubt it. I think he'll be a higher first round pick than that. I could see Penix going around. I'm going to go probably around 15. So they could potentially go up and get him if they wanted to. But I don't think Penix will still be around. Would be a nice fit though. He has a nice style of play. He's a bigger kid, has a nice arm. So it wouldn't be a bad fit. I just don't think he'll still be there. That being said, to address the question at on a grand scheme, is they have to be looking at a quarterback situation, right? Even if they aren't necessarily going to start him, Gino signed a relatively short contract. There are outs in the contract. So, they do have to have their eye on the future a little bit. This is a deep quarterback class, so they could potentially get one of them. I know that there's going to be some guys that will probably be in the second round. So, there would be ones that are available. I would imagine, like Bo Nix is probably still going to be on the board. Penix, again, you may have to go up a couple of spots to get him. Obviously, Caleb Williams, he'll be gone. I wouldn't really love him for the Seahawks anyway, but Penix would be good. You keep the kid at home, that'd be cool. So yeah, I like the idea behind it. I just don't think you can actually get there, not without giving up a bunch to go get him. All right. Any players I don't think will be back next season? That's always tough to say this point in the year. You kind of have to see where people end up, because even if you're having kind of a rough season, you can kind of get it back on track. And as long as you finish strong, a lot of times you can get back the next year on the team. The other way around is if you start to drop off, that's where your job security becomes a little bit of a question moving forward. But I don't have anybody where I just out and out think they're going to be off the team for next year. But tough to say. I think the one that might be interesting is Jamal Adams, because his contract, as I recall, comes up. And if that's the case, he's having a good season. Man, it's tough to say because he's been injured, but he's not now. He's making an impact now. So that one is a little bit of a question mark on whether or not they're going to, re-sign him to another big contract after, he spent most of this last one off the field. So, but yeah, as it sits right now, I don't have any where I'm just out and out. I think somebody's not going to be back next year. Did I hear that Bruce Irvin is back in the league? Yeah. So if I read it right, he's going to be playing for Detroit. So awesome for him to still be around and doing his thing. That is very cool. So shout out Bruce Irvin. He he deserves to play as long as he wants to play. Dude is a stud. Do they extend Williams? I mean, I feel like you have to, right? You gave up a second rounder to go get him. I can't imagine that you give up a second rounder for somebody you're just going to let walk out of the building the next year. So I would imagine they get something done. He did find, he got his first sack on the team, so that was awesome. So I mean, there's just there's no scenario unless he just has a huge locker room issue or it flames out somehow. I can't imagine a scenario where they don't try and bring him back again because they gave up a second rounder to bring him in. That's a high pick to just throw away for a rental. So that really lends itself to them bringing him back in, getting him a contract this offseason. So yes, to answer your question, I do believe that they get something done with Williams. All right. Do we win at least one of the games against the Niners? I hope so. I really hope we win the one on Thanksgiving because I'm going to be there. And so I would like to go to a game where we win, especially because it's going to be cold. And, it'll be better if you're winning because then the excitement will keep you moving around, keep you warm because, at the end of the day, it's going to be 30 degrees. So it is going to be a chilly one. You're going to be bundled up for sure. But yeah, I mean, they definitely can. They definitely can. Obviously, the Niners are, when they're healthy, they are a juggernaut of a team. There's no doubt. But they are a divisional team. And divisional games are funny. It's probably more than anything else that any given Sunday. You can have the worst record against the best record, and it's going to be a dogfight the whole time. So I would bet that they can snag one of those games. Sadly, I think during that stretch, there's a really good chance that they end up going 1-3. Again, mostly because of the defense not wrapping up, allowing some of these players to be able to break outside on busted coverages and then still having a tough time protecting the middle of the field, which is something that all of those teams can do really well. It's actually something I'm a little worried about with the Rams because they have Kupp and Puka that you can line up in the slot. So I do think they can steal one of the games against the Niners. But even if they don't, say they go 0-4 during that stretch, they still have a path to get to that 10-7 that I was kind of predicting at the beginning of the season. And 10-7 in the NFC probably gets you a wild card spot. So, and from the beginning, I was thinking that they would be a divisional round exit. There's some issues with this team, just the way that it's built, that I don't think they're quite primed to go deep into the playoffs this year. I think they have a few more pieces to add to really hit that mark. But, if you lose those 4 games, you can still get to the 10-7. I think you still get in. And if you do get in as the 5th seed, then you're going to play the Saints or the Falcons, something like that, which is a very winnable game, which would get them into the divisional round, which is where I thought they would be. So I do think that they can get one of them from there. And, the other part of the question is, what do I think the record would be the rest of the season? I still think that the 10-7 that I thought at the beginning of the season is going to be that route. So the Seahawks are probably still 10-7. They're probably still a wild card team. And honestly, I still think they're going to be a divisional round exit. So that's just kind of where I see this Hawks team as it's currently constructed with some of the weaknesses that it has. All right. Can we use our tight ends more? Yeah, I mean, it's funny because they're on the field a lot. I'm not really sure why we're not using them so much, but time they do use him, it's usually a pretty good play. So I'm not sure why they're not catching the ball a little bit more. But, it's something that either they're seeing on tape that isn't quite what they want it to be, or maybe it's just a decision-making thing from Geno. It's really tough to say. But I'd like to see him used more too. I think it would actually alleviate some of the pass rush because they generally float out to the flat, short little out routes, stuff like that. So it ends up taking one of those linebackers off from the middle of the field to stretch them out a little bit, which I think would open up some of the running game if they were using the tight ends more. So I like where your head's at for sure. And, I'd like to see him do it. Let's see. We got is Geno going to get us to the Super Bowl anytime in the future? He definitely can. So the thing is if the defense can correct some of the problems that they have, right? If they can start protecting the middle of the field a little bit better. Now, this isn't something new for this year. This is something that's kind of been a problem over the last couple of seasons, but they've really struggled for in-breaking routes and, seam routes, and they've struggled with consistent tackling. If you can do both of those things and you can create a top 10 defense, then a guy like Geno can absolutely get you to a Super Bowl and potentially win. It's why you were able to see Jimmy G get in there. It's why Trent Dilfer has a ring. Flacco, he played amazing that one season, but he was still carried by that defense. You can definitely get there. It's, Stafford has a ring. He's not the most athletic guy ever there, though he does have an incredible arm. But, it's the guys like Geno can get you there. They're not going to will the team there, right? They need a lot of pieces around them to work correctly. And honestly, it's also just good football, right? A lot of guys kind of knock Geno, or what they call a system quarterback. I prefer that I would prefer that they are able to run a system and that I have a complete enough team to create that scenario, as opposed to you need Josh Allen to be your entire team all the time. You go by the way of his arm. If he makes mistakes, it's a wrap. Whereas if you have a nice, complete team, you can have an element that isn't having the best game ever and still win. So can he get them there? Sure. But they need to correct some of the holes that they have on the team. If they don't make the Super Bowl, does Metcalf leave? That is an interesting question. So I don't think so. This is a scenario where you're going to have you only have a couple more years of Tyler Lockett being on this team. And so I really don't think they're going to let DK walk. I think they're going to go ahead and keep him. Then you have JSN coming along. You have Bobo coming along. So it's a team that is going to start to shift more to DK, I think, as Lockett gets closer to retirement. And, again, I think Lockett probably has a year or two left, and that'll probably be about it. So then you'll see that offense really start to shift over to more of a DK heavy type of offense. So I wouldn't think so. I don't think this team is quite set up for Super Bowl or bust. They're still in that kind of building stage. Now, if they're a couple years down the road and they're not getting any closer, or they're starting to slide backwards, then I think they probably do trade him, probably have him under contract, but trade him, get a couple of, number ones for him, something like that. But as it sits right now, I think they still have a few years of DK as they continue to build this team and, kind of just grow as a franchise overall. Plus, they may have a little bit easier path because you have to look at the Niners starting to lose some people over the next couple of years, as contracts start to come up. So I don't think he leaves, but anything's possible, right? It's the NFL. All right. And then before we get into our preview of the Rams and Seahawks, I want to do a shout out to the Bison on Main. We did the Thursday Night Football Sports Bar series there last night, and it was a ton of fun. Awesome place, great food. So if you haven't been in there and you're in Old Town Bothell, definitely go check them out. It was a lot of fun to sit there, interview their guys, and and of course watch the game. So big shout out to them. Be sure to check them out right there in Old Town Bothell. Pete Carroll for Coach of the Year. I mean, he's definitely going to be in the conversation. It is interesting though that he hasn't won one because he's been able to do a lot with not a lot, or he's been able to win despite the fact that they shouldn't. Last year was a prime example. Everybody thought they were going to be a 3-win team, right? And so for them to be able to come in, they saw something in Geno that, the rest of us didn't. And then I was one of the people before that season was like, we know what Geno is. Let's give Locke a try. And I was wrong, right? Apparently we didn't know what Geno was. He played exceptionally well. So, do I think that he could be Coach of the Year? Yes. I don't think he will, though. I think he gets snubbed there. I think your Texans coach is probably a front runner there. They are doing so much more than I really thought they were going to coming into the season. I thought they were going to be a decent team, that still needs a lot of pieces. And they've really come out and played well. Even in losses, they've looked good. So kudos to what they're doing down there in Houston. All right. Okay, so let's take a look at this Rams team. So Stafford should be back. They're coming off their bye week. And it's funny because they went and signed Carson Wentz. So it'll be interesting to see how healed Stafford's thumb is, because if he is still not quite right, Carson Wentz could come in and Carson Wentz can win you a game. As much as everybody hates on Carson Wentz for whatever reason, whether it's the intangibles that you don't like, the durability you don't like, or, there's been rumors of him being a problem in a locker room, which is why he's bounced around the league or whatever. But at the end of the day, he can win you games. He's a pretty efficient quarterback. If he is your year-long starter, he is every bit of that 3,500 yards, 2-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio, which win you a lot of games in the NFL. And if he were to come in and play in this game, there's a real chance that he could come in and get a win, because there hasn't been any recent tape, and certainly no tape with this team. So if you were to have Carson Wentz have to jump in and he gets Cooper Kupp and he gets Puka Nacua, and of course they watch film too, so they're going to line them up in the slot a lot, and they're going to have a lot of in-breaking routes. They're going to have a lot of seam routes. They'll put the tight ends there as well, but you're going to put guys like Cooper Kupp who can create separation, and you're going to put them in there because now you either have a nickel corner on them or you have an outside linebacker having to pick them up. And neither one of those guys is probably staying with Puka or Kupp, right? So all of a sudden, the middle of this field feels real vulnerable going against this Rams team. And, I guess the one thing that's good is they don't have a great pass rush overall. They don't have great sack totals for the year. But you pair a little bit underrated or underproducing defensive line against Seattle's offensive line, which really isn't very good at the moment. The trenches could be a very interesting part of this game. But Stafford has also not had a lot of time. There's been a lot of pressures on him. And the good thing about this Seattle front seven is they're starting to get those pressures. I want to say they're top 10 in sacks for the year. And this is one where I think they can get in and kind of beat up on Stafford. Again, I think Stafford gets the start At least that's what I was reading earlier today. But if he gets the start, it won't really matter if it's him or Carson Wentz. They're going to be under pressure quite a bit, just because they also don't have a great offensive line. They've allowed a lot of pressures, which is why Stafford ends up getting hurt. So those are kind of keys to this game that I'm really looking at. The defense and that Rams offense is the in-breaking routes. Those are the ones that are going to absolutely barbecue this defense if they don't find a way to stop those down, or at least make the tackle once they do, right? Because it's not like those are generally deep routes. Those are usually a few yards, somewhere between 4 to 6 yards is usually where those in-breaking routes get caught. And if they are at least playing a little bit softer zone so that you're not getting by them at, getting yards after contact, if you can keep those things in front of you, you at least have a shot at it. But if you are trailing and they're coming across, all of a sudden that's a 15-yard gain before a safety comes up and gets him. So those are some real concerns, even going against a Rams team that, realistically they should be able to beat. But there's elements to this defense that, man, it's a worry for sure. The other part of it is they got to be able to get off the field on third down. They are one of the lower end of the league as far as conversion rate on their end, as far as getting them. And then, of course, on conversion rate against other teams against them. So sadly, both of those stats are a little bit damning for this team. And it's something they have to figure out, especially as they start to get into the really hard part of the schedule here. You can't give teams, I mean, the Rams included, you can't give teams like the Rams, you can't give the teams Niners, Eagles, Cowboys, you can't give those guys multiple shots because at third downs, right? They also got to figure out how to get less penalties. They've been a little bit better over the last couple of weeks. I want to say they've only had 5 in each game the last 2 weeks, which is down quite a bit from earlier in the season where they were close to 10. So at least that's trending the right direction. Like we said earlier, DK didn't get one. So, it's always a big one when he doesn't. So, but yeah, those are kind of the things. And that's sort of where I say I want to see this defense get cleaned up is, the alignment on the field. You got guys out of position a lot. And again, I know some of it is just because they're hyper aggressive and they're trying to get on the play. But unfortunately, if the guys up front don't create that play, you've now created a pocket that can be a big play, which we saw Sam Howell deliver on a few times. So those are a little bit of the things that are a real concern going against this Rams team that has, it's not a super young team, right? Like there's a lot of veteran leadership. They've seen this team quite a few times, so they know how to come after them. And if you give Stafford time, he will absolutely pick you apart. So those front 7, they got to get home, and our secondary needs to be real disciplined, not just in tackling, but making sure that they're actually in the positions they should be in. Because if you give up the types of completions that Washington had, they scored on them too, but Stafford will make you pay for it. So those are definitely a concern for me. Let's see. Yeah. So Stafford, hasn't had great protection. So that's one thing that I think we have a real shot at is if we can get after him, we can create some sacks, certainly quarterback hurries. Then that gives our secondary opportunities to catch maybe a pass that's a little early or a little late, just kind of errant off target. Our defense is definitely opportunistic. So if the ball is around, they find their way to it. Those are the keys to the game for me. Thanks again for tuning in. If you are watching here on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe. If you're watching on Roku, be sure to hang out on the channel for the next hour of programming. Other than that, we are going to let you get back to your Friday. Thanks again for tuning in. Have a good weekend.